Okay, welcome everybody to our webinar this morning. We are talking about how to eat an elephant, problem-solving skills with Sharon Gurr, who is a counsellor and trainer with the Rock Trust in Scotland. Before I hand over to Sharon, a quick reminder for anybody, if this is your first time on one of our Fianza webinars, you have a small little dashboard on the right-hand side of your screen. You can use that to ask questions throughout the webinar. So if there are topics that you would like to raise or points that you want to make about your own service, or you want more information, you can ask questions in that little box. I'll be moderating it throughout the webinar, and I can feed those questions to Sharon. I can see Ray there has written hi. Hi Ray, I hope you enjoy the webinar and you can enjoy it as a participant this week rather than a panelist. Actually, on that topic, we'll send the information out after this webinar. There'll be an email with Sharon's presentation, but we'll also have a link so you can look at the archives of our previous webinars that we've recorded, such as Ray's one on trauma-informed tips for COVID-19 from last week, and there's other webinars on motivational interviewing, defining youth homelessness, motivational interviewing, I think I said already. So lots of different topics. And on that link, you will also have information for upcoming webinars. So this is, of course, in a wider series that we're doing throughout the COVID-19 lockdowns. So we'll be doing webinars on domestic violence, child abuse, self-harm, self-care therapies, and much more. So please take a look at the link if you have other topics that you're interested in. And a last reminder before I hand over to Sharon is this is part of our weekly webinar series, but before COVID-19 ever started, you can almost imagine such a time, we were doing a monthly webinar series on youth homelessness already. And so we have our fourth installment in that series this Friday. We're talking about financing youth housing solutions. And so we're joined by Michelle Norris, who's chair of the Irish Housing Agency, and Samuel Lee Kilstrom, who is the CEO of the Finnish Youth Housing Association. And so on Friday at the lunchtime webinar, they will be discussing how do you finance housing solutions for young people. And again, there'll be a link for that webinar when we do the follow-up email to this. So that's all the updates from me. I'm going to hand over to Sharon, who's going to tell us how do you eat an elephant. Sharon.
Yes, thank you, Robbie. Thank you for that introduction. Welcome everybody to this week's webinar. Yes, you heard correctly. We are going to learn how to eat an elephant. And for the vegetarians out there, we have got the vegetarian option as well, how to eat an oak tree. So let's start. Oh no. Okay. Hold on a second. I'm struggling to change my screen here.
Do you want to come out of it and go back into it maybe?
Yep, let's try that. Let's see here. Hold on a second. I'm just going to shut this down. No, it's not budging.
Okay, I'm just going to give me 1 sec. I'll take back the screen sharing and then I'll share it back with you, and it might maybe
okay.
Rework. Do you have it there?
Yes, show my screen. There it is. Okay, perfect. Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay, so yes, when we talk about eating an elephant, I suppose the analogy is quite fitting. You know, when we look at problem solving, problems in our lives can be seen as quite big and overwhelming. And I think of this in terms of the clients that we work with. Many of us work with clients with complex needs. And, you know, we can't get away from the fact that when we talk of complex needs, we're also looking at trauma. And for a lot of our clients, if not all of our clients maybe, they do come from a background of trauma, and we need to acknowledge, and I think, you know, Ray's listening in this morning. Hi, Ray. In his trauma-informed practice training, Ray actually mentions that one of the areas that people with complex needs will struggle with is problem solving. And he makes a very good reference to this in his Ladder for Life training. So if anybody is interested in that, I strongly recommend you get in touch with Ray and find out a little bit more about his training on trauma-informed practice. So yes, I think when we talk about problem-solving skills, we need to acknowledge that for a lot of our clients, this is going to be a huge area of difficulty. And we have to also look at the fact that trauma has had an effect on their ability, their cognitive ability to problem solve, or to kind of resist the temptation to catastrophize over what you and I would probably look at as little problems. To people with trauma and to people with complex needs, working through a simple task of problem solving can be a huge thing. And this is where we can look at the analogy of an elephant. So what I'm going to look at is, for the next few minutes, I'm going to be giving you some tools that you could perhaps think about using with your clients when they faced with challenges and problems that in their mind they can equate to an elephant or an oak tree. So let's have a look at that. So let's start to have a look at how is it that we can eat an elephant without feeling overwhelmed. Okay, so the first thing to acknowledge is that I think it's common knowledge that if anybody was to sit down in one meal and think they're going to eat a huge big elephant, that is going to be overwhelming and daunting for anybody. So the first thing we're going to look at is let's look at a 5-step plan how to eat our elephants or our oak trees. Okay, so the first step is let's see if we can break it into chunks. So let's take the problem and let's see if we can break it into small bite-sized pieces. So as I said there, eating an elephant in one go will make you ill and may even put you off wanting to face it ever again. And our problems are the same. So step one is don't look at the bigger picture. Don't see this huge big problem. Let's start to break it down into manageable, smaller pieces. And then what we can do is we can start to work on one piece at a time. So when you're breaking down, when you're working with your clients and you're breaking down this huge big elephant into small bite-sized pieces, you may want to start by perhaps suggesting getting a pen and a piece of paper out and kind of looking at the big problem with your client, and then to kind of think about what are the elements that make up this huge big elephant. You've got the trunk, you've got the feet, you've got the ears. So if you can kind of equate all the different parts of the problem that make the huge big problem. What would be quite nice is, can you think of a problem in your life right now that you could perhaps break into chunks? And I think it would be quite interesting for you to kind of see what it feels like in your life when you've got a problem and try and break it down into bite-sized chunks, because then you can get the feeling what it would be like for your clients as well. So step one is take the problem and see if you can break it down into smaller pieces. Okay, once you've done that, step two, this is where it would be quite good to sit with your client and kind of help them come up with a solution. So we call this a brainstorming session. And what I like to say at this point is allow you and your client to be as creative and as free as you can. You know, and you're thinking of encouraging them to come up with, you know, any idea of brainstorming in solving, you know, these problems. And remember that no idea is too small, too big, too crazy, or too silly. Okay, because ideas are just that, they are ideas. The other thing we want to think of when we're brainstorming is take your time. Okay, don't rush. Spend your time with your clients. Encourage your clients to take their time, and pen and piece of paper, and perhaps start to make a list of ideas, because that's what they are. They're just ideas. And it's kind of like climbing stairs. Let's take it one step at a time. So that's brainstorming. Step 3 is, once you've got all your brainstorming and all your ideas out of your head and onto the paper, then pick one. Pick one idea that you think is realistic. And, you know, when we look at goal setting, for a lot of us, I don't know if, I'm sure a lot of us have come across that concept of SMART. You know, when we work with goals, particularly with our clients, you know, we're encouraged to make sure that the goals that we set, we help our clients set, are SMART. And the analogy is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-scaled. And when we're doing planning, it's good to bear these SMART concepts in mind as well. You know, because we've got to make sure that the plans that we make, whether it's ourselves or the people that we work with, they need to be realistic. They need to be specific as well. So when it comes to making a plan, choose a brainstorm idea, pick one to work on first, okay? And makes sense to start off with an easy one that you know you can achieve quite easily. And the reason why we do this is because if you choose that easy one, you know that you're going to achieve it. It's going to make you feel good, and it's going to motivate you to take on the next piece. If you were to take on a piece that is particularly difficult, what that will do is it will kind of enhance and it'll encourage those negative feelings of overwhelmingness that your client would have felt previously. And what it would do, it would just reinstate the evidence of that negative thinking again, that look, see, I try to do something and I can't do it. So it makes sense that if you know, when you're choosing the piece to work on, make sure it's an easy one that you know your client will achieve, because that will then give your client the motivation and the self-esteem to take on the next piece. So write down step by step how you're going to do it. And again, start small. If it means step 1, I'm going to get out of bed this morning, write that down. So don't take anything for granted. Don't take any action for granted. You know, it's up to your client what they feel that they can achieve, and let them write it down in a step form. Once you've done this, very important in our planning is we need to acknowledge the fact that sometimes our plans don't always go according to our plan. And also bearing in mind that a lot of the clients that we work with, in their experience of achieving goals or overcoming hurdles or problems, it hasn't gone well. And at that first hurdle, that's when they give up. And what that does to them is that it perpetuates that cycle of low self-esteem, low self-worth, and just that whole give up mode just takes over again. So we need to acknowledge that, because to our clients, it's a very, very real position. And to them, it's their reality. So what I like to do when I'm working with a client in terms of problem solving, I like to spend a little bit of time looking at the possible barriers that they could come up against. And I like to put that in the plan so that we're not taken by surprise. So what we do is together we sit down and we think, what could go wrong? What in the past, what barriers have you come up against in solving problems? And then out of crisis, let's see if we can kind of come up with plan B to overcome those barriers. I think this is important because for them to see it's part of the plan. So it's not anything out with the plan, but it's part of the plan. And I think, you know, it's almost like problem solving within the problem solving process. So when or if, you know, the barrier presents itself, the client will not feel taken by surprise, or they won't feel a little bit intimidated, or what do I do, panicky, because there's a plan how to deal with barriers, you know, as they go along. So I think very important, when you make a plan, number one, to think of making sure you're not taking on the difficult ones. Start off with the easy ones and work your way up. And also take into consideration any barriers or challenges that your client could face in achieving this problem solving exercise that they're doing. So step 4 is putting it into action. But what we want to do, and remember what I said before, is let's take our time, okay? It's all about slowing things down. It's all about being, you know, responsive, not reactive. Because what we want to do is we want to, you know, from a neuralistic point of view, we want to actually put our front brain on. Our front brain is our thinking brain, it's our cognitive brain. And if we've got our front brain on, we cannot have our back brain, which is our emotional brain. And it's our emotional brain that stops us from thinking things through, from being cognitive. So it's very, very important when we're doing problem solving skills and techniques with our clients to recognize that we cannot have our back brain and our front brain working at the same time. Okay, so for some of us that work with clients that I used the word before, catastrophize. That's a term we use, which means, you know, people tend to make mountains out of molehills. Usually it's because they've got their back brain on. You know, what happens is our experiences from the past gets triggered, and our, you know, nervous system kicks in, and this is something we don't even have control over. And it leaves people thinking, you know, why couldn't I think right? You know, why did I respond like that? Well, that's because, unfortunately, their back brain was functioning, which didn't allow their front brain to operate. So what we're wanting to do is we want to make sure that our clients are operating from the cognitive brain. And how we do this is we kind of slow them down and get them grounded again. So step 4 says check your plan, and once you've checked it, then you can put it in action. And what we're checking for is, number 1, is it realistic? Is the problem, is the piece that we're working on, is it within our control to work it through? Second thing is, are we aiming at just one thing? Because we're tempted, excuse me, we're tempted to kind of look at so many different pieces of our puzzle, of our problem, sorry, and we can't do that because that's when we're going to start to get overwhelmed. So what we need to do is to make sure that we're only focusing on one thing at a time. The next thing is it slow? Have we rushed into this? Have we spoken it through? Have we kind of brainstormed our ideas? And then the last area we want to check is, are we prepared for the barriers? Have we spent time thinking about what could prevent us from fulfilling our plan? And if so, what measures have we put in place to overcome those barriers? And if we can honestly say that if we can tick all 5 of those boxes, then let's go for it. Let's put our plan into action and start to problem solve. The last step, I think, is equally important, because this step is going to help us increase our self-worth and improve our self-esteem and our confidence. And, ultimately what we want to do is we want to overcome our problems. But more than that, what we want to do is we want to develop our own toolbox. So what we want to do is we want to promote what I call self-efficacy in our clients. And how we do that is when they've achieved their goal, and in this case, solving a problem, what we want to do is we want to kind of spend some time with them and kind of encourage them to spend time reflecting and reviewing. How did that whole experience go for them? How was it? Was it an easy process? Was it difficult? Did they learn anything new, perhaps about the situation? Or maybe they learned something about themselves. Would they do anything differently? Or perhaps not. Maybe they would do something the same. Was there a particular part of that problem-solving process that they really liked? Or was there a particular part of the process that they actually didn't like? These are questions that we can encourage our clients to think about, because from here is where we're going to help them to discover within themselves their own abilities. And as workers, what we don't want to do is reinvent the wheel. Also, what we don't want to do is we don't want to create a thing of dependency with our clients. We want our clients to go on and recognize the potential that they have within themselves. We want our clients to kind of recognize the value that they have within themselves. And for a lot of them, this is what's going to get them to a place where they can be motivated to kind of fulfill their potential, and also to kind of go on and fulfill their goals. So it's very, very important that we don't overlook this step of the plan, where we give the opportunity to our clients to review and reflect on the good work that they've done, and perhaps any learning developments that they can put in place for the next time. And I think it's important as well that we use that term, the next time, because what we want to do is we want to encourage our clients to use these skills, because it's only through practicing our skills that we can bring them to a place where we can feel confident in them, and also to kind of pass them on to other people that we work with. And I think it's very important, because when we've mastered a skill, whether it's a worker, whether it's our clients, it's good to pass that on to other people as well, because that kind of solidifies our learning. And it also, what it does for our clients as well, it promotes what we call social capital. And it's so good and healthy for all of us, especially, the people that we work with, to have this thing called social capital, because what that does, that increases self-worth and self-confidence. And it also builds up resilience. And I think, when we're working with clients with trauma and with complex needs, what we want is we want to see our clients with good, strong resilience, that ability to bounce back. I think it's so important, because one of the cornerstones in helping people recover from trauma and from just negative experiences. So to conclude, that is how we eat an elephant. Okay, you know, when something goes wrong, it's far too easy to feel disheartened and to give up. But what we can do is to remind ourselves why we started this in the first place. And you know, I spoke a little bit previously about motivational interviewing, and this is a good example to kind of bring in those skills. You know, why is it? Remind your clients why it is that they wanted to start this process in the beginning, and hopefully they will find the motivation to keep on going. Sometimes what would be a good idea is, if you know, when we're in that positive place of motivation, is to perhaps think about writing down how we're feeling at that point. Sometimes we can even write a letter to ourselves, you know, 6 months in advance, so that when we are feeling a little bit low in motivation, we can pick up that letter and read it. And that will spur on that excitement and that passion that we had in the beginning to start to make those changes. If things are still going wrong and things, you know, are still not falling in place with your clients, it's okay to say, well, look, let's put that piece of work, that chunk of the elephant to one side, and let's see if there's another piece of work that we can start on. Who says that you've got to start on one piece and focus all on one piece? But the key is to remember to work on one piece at a time. You know, it's all right to put that piece to one side and try another piece. It's also okay that if you're struggling, to look for additional support. You know, the nice thing is that there are so many agencies out there that specialize in specific areas. And, you know, that all you need to do is ask your current support workers if they can refer you to other agencies, or if you're a worker yourself, think about, you know, what resources you have that you can pass on to your clients as well. While there are problems that we do have control over, there are also problems that we don't have control over, like illness or old age. And that's something that we need to work on with our clients as well, because a lot of the feelings of overwhelmingness come from a lack of being in control. And if we remember the 5 principles of trauma, and I'm saying trauma constantly because more and more, you know, we're working with clients that are presenting with trauma, and we cannot get away from the fact that we are working with trauma on a daily basis. And that's going to have a huge impact on how we support our clients. And so working with clients in terms of problem-solving techniques, it's important to recognize that for a lot of people that have been traumatized, one of the biggest areas that they struggle with is this whole disempowerment and the control being taken off them. And, you know, problems can be a huge trigger in this regard, because for them, the challenge or the difficulty is to recognize what problems we have control over and what problems we don't have control over. And it would be a good idea to kind of work through that with them and focus on, well, what problems do I have control over? And let's focus on that. And then bring it into a place where there's an acceptance. You know, well, I don't have any control over growing old, but actually I do have control over this problem. And then let's start to focus on those type of problems that we've got control over. We may also need to ask for help for the bigger pieces. But what we need to remember is, for most of the problems that we actually do have control over. And for most of those problems, the best way to overcome them is to break them down into small, manageable size pieces that you can manage now. And remember the analogy, not just of eating the elephant or the oak tree, but also how you get to the top of the ladder. You've got to take it one step at a time. And if you miss a step, you may have to go back and do that step again. So it's about taking your time, not to rush, breaking it down into bite-sized chunks, starting with the easier ones first, brainstorming your ideas, making a plan for the what-ifs, the barriers, working through those challenges, and then putting them into action. But most importantly as well, is spend some time reflecting, reviewing, and you know what? Give yourself a pat on the back for doing a good job. Thank you. So that's all I have for today. That's how to eat an elephant. Hope you found that a little bit useful. And over to you, Robbie.
Great, thanks very much, Sharon. It was a really fantastic webinar. Particularly, I think the bit towards the end that it's not just about problem solving for the sake of problem solving, but there's a whole element of learning new skills.
Yes.
Learning new skills. I'm just going to turn back on your camera, Sharon, just so we can have maybe a quick conversation. Can you get it back on yourself, or?
Yep. Hold on, I'll put it back here.
Because we have some questions and some comments from people who were participating. I think Ray had a really good question from the earlier on in the webinar towards the first few tips, was that often clients do not want to name the problem to begin with because it makes them feel very overwhelmed with emotions. Do you have any thoughts on how you can help a client feel safe enough to name the problem to begin with? How do you help someone name a problem you feel overwhelmed with as you believe, because they believe it cannot be solved?
Yes, okay. So that's a good question. And I think, you know, we can't underestimate the importance of what I call a therapeutic relationship. It's all about trust, okay? And it's about that relational connection that we have with our clients. And Ray is absolutely right. You know, for a lot of our clients, particularly those that are struggling with trauma or, relationships with workers that they don't have trust with, they're not going to be able to just go openly and share the problem. So I think it is about establishing a trusting relationship first. So as workers, we've got to feel our way and navigate our way through the relationship. And it may mean that we're going to spend a bit of time building that up. And when the client feels comfortable and safe enough to talk about, the problems, I think then we can go with it. But I think what's very important is we've got to go with the client. We can't rush it. And that's why we're saying, take your time, be led by the client. Does that answer the question?
I think so, but if you have more to add, participants, you can do so in the questions box. Another question from Shay, who asked, do you have any suggested adaptations for working with people who have acquired brain injury or cognitive impairment, or for working in different contexts? So examples on the streets versus in hostels, perhaps in housing or in hospital wards.
Okay, yes, you've got to take into account people's cognitive ability, okay? Because as I said before, problem solving is going to take a lot of cognitive thinking. And when you're dealing with people, when you're working with people with cognitive inability, you've got to take that into account. And I think what you've got to do is you can still use the plan, the 4-step plan, but you may have to use other techniques, maybe slowing it down a little bit more, watching your language, how you're wording things. You may have to repeat the plan a little bit more. So I think what you need to do is it would be a good idea is if you take your client and you make it person-centered really, to make sure that it's at their level. So you don't want to kind of rush it or use language that they can't relate to. And likewise, if you're in a hostel, or you're working with people in addictions or certain mental health, so you can use the 4-step plan, but just make the alterations to suit the client.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you very much. Another question, I think this comes back to the point that you were raising earlier as well about not creating dependency in the relationship.
Yeah.
But sometimes staff mean well, but their default is to solve problems for clients and helping them.
Yes.
And often this can de-skill the clients. Do you think this can be a problem? And how can you help staff to resist that urge to just step in and to solve the issue?
Yeah, that's a common issue with workers. And you're absolutely right. We've got to watch, because what we don't want to create is a culture of helplessness. There's, we don't want our clients to become what we call learned helpless, where they see us as the go-to person, because what that's going to create is that's not going to create an environment of empowerment. And I think what we need to do as workers is we need to test our motive. What is it that we're getting out of this? And do we have our client's best interest at heart? And if we have our client's best interest at heart, then our agenda of getting the job done, or coming across like an excellent worker, let's put that to one side. And our focus is not on us and our anxiety or our needs, but rather the client. And it's difficult, because a lot of us in the helping profession, we fixers, but we need to move away from that, because what we want to be is we want to be enablers. And we want to enable our clients to develop their own coping strategies, healthy coping strategies, and part of that is being interdependent, not dependent on the worker.
And actually, come back to the last question there about tailoring the approach to the cognitive capacities of people you're working with or the environment. Shay has just commented back to say that I often ask people to record parts of our sessions or to make notes on their phones, but recording definitely works better for people who don't read or write. So I think that's also a really practical tip and suggestion. We have a question from Ruth asking, who says that she works with Syrian refugees, many of whom have experienced very complex trauma. Do you have a recommendation for working with this vulnerable group of people? And a quick reminder to any participants: you can put your questions into the box as Sharon is answering some of the other questions.
I think it's very important. That's a good question, because we need to take into account the different cultural aspects of when we're working with trauma. And although trauma is very subjective, we have to acknowledge that a cultural aspect plays a huge big part in how we're going to relate to trauma. And I think very importantly is those 5 principles of working with trauma, I think, is key. And they are empowerment. There's 5 principles, and what I'll do is I'll put it on the website for you. But if you can stick to these principles, whichever culture and whichever setting you're working with, I think that would be the safest way to work with trauma.
Those 5 principles are flexible enough.
Yes,
And we'll include those in the follow-up email as well to this webinar. There's some other, I guess, more comments and questions, but just really important, Ray noted, around the emotional memories that we associate with past failures can be really triggering, and that when we think about a problem, we need to build up new memories of when we have successfully solved those problems. And so it's great to encourage staff to reflect on the process and validate problems that have been solved, not just to rush on, you know, that you get one thing done and you rush straight into solving another problem. You take that time. I think that actually really leads into another question from Claire Hart, who's from the Fusion France. Hi, Claire. How do you celebrate the steps forward and the achievements along the way? I guess it kind of links a little bit to what Ray was saying as well.
Yes, yeah, I think I think this is very, very important. For a lot of the clients that we work with, this is going to be a challenge because they're not used to hearing positive affirmations. So I think as workers, what I'd like to encourage us is to be sensitive to that as well. You know, don't take for granted that they've taken it in, but to spend time and say, you know, how do you feel about the achievements, and spend time reflecting and giving them the space to kind of absorb the good thing that they've done. So Claire, absolutely, you make a very good point there. You don't want to go overboard because it can also make them feel a little bit embarrassed and, you know, on the spot. But you want to create that balance where they know intrinsically that they've done a good job, and it's something that they can hold in their memory, because our brain has got a fantastic way of kind of repairing those pathways through positive experiences. So let's not underplay the positiveness. Let's accentuate the positive, and it's kind of like positive reinforcement as well. So kind of look out for any little things that our clients have achieved, and let's bring that to their attention as well. So absolutely.
Great. That's it for the questions. The last ones are just comments saying thank you very much, great presentation, very clear skills for staff to try. So on the whole, I think a fantastic webinar. Thanks again, Sharon, for joining us. We'll be sending out a follow-up email with some resources that Sharon mentioned, the PowerPoint, a recording, and if you have any follow-up questions afterwards, feel free to get in touch with me and I can put you in touch with Sharon if questions come to you and we get off the call. Otherwise, I hope everyone has enjoyed the rest of the day and has a nice week. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Bye.